I'd like to say a bit about Abraham Maslow, an American psychologist of the 20th century. Um, Many students of nonviolence are interested in him uh, because he's a representative of humanistic psychology, which the students see as closely related to nonviolence. So I'd like to give some perspective on that. Maslow was born in 1908, and he only lived to be 62, but he had quite an impact during his lifetime. He had teachers who are both, there were some behaviorists, particularly at the University of Wisconsin. And then in New York, he was also under the tutelage of Ruth Benedict, the anthropologist, and Alfred Adler, the psychoanalyst. And when I think about where Maslow's humanistic psychology came from, I can't help but see it as a kind of synthesis of some of those influences. Um, Let me just show you his. There's a picture of Abraham Maslow, and his famous hierarchy of needs is probably the thing that he's most remembered for. Um, Now, he was working at a time when um, American psychology was dominated by behaviorism. And looking back at behaviorism, it seems to regard animals and people as sort of interchangeable behaving units. And behaviorism sought to find laws of behavior that would apply to everyone. But Maslow, the humanist, thought that people were individuals, and the hierarchy of needs kind of points to one way in which individuals might differ. Um, Maslow said that human needs are, some of them are basic physiological needs at the bottom of his pyramid. And then once basic needs were satisfied, other needs could be addressed. So here's a way in which individuals could differ from one another in terms of which needs preoccupy them, which needs are most motivating now that they have perhaps some more basic needs met. It's a good idea, and it helps us to break away from that behaviorist mindset by recognizing some of the truly um, psychological, cognitive, and perhaps psychodynamic as well as behavioral aspects of being a person. So it's an interesting idea, and it does address one of the problems that psychology had at the time. And Maslow is a bit of an outlier in his career. When he died in 1970, the field was finally breaking away from behaviorism, but it was a really strong influence during most of his career. The hierarchy of needs has been criticized from a number of directions. For one thing, some people say it doesn't talk about intrinsic motivation. It recognizes these internal needs of self-actualization and self-esteem and so on, but it doesn't say enough about the things that the behaviorists informed us about, rewards and punishments and things like that. Well, okay. But this is an attempt to break away from behaviorism. So I think maybe that's to be expected. Some people have said that these needs are all perfectly valid, but they don't have to be in this order in the pyramid. And the needs may not be ordered for every person in the same way. It may be a different layering. that we would find in some people than others. And finally, there are people who have pointed out that we shouldn't necessarily interpret the pyramid as a developmental sequence with people starting out with physiological needs and progressing from layer to layer. That that's not necessarily what the pyramid means. I'm inviting students of the psychology of violence and nonviolence to think about what the pyramid has to do with those concerns, because there's a lot of motivational psychology involved in the committing of violence, in being the victim of violence. So where does that fit in? And again, I'm going to take a clue from James Gilligan, who I think was influenced by Ruth Benedict, one of Maslow's teachers. It's an interesting connection, but there's a loop there that probably hasn't been closed. But Gilligan says that an absolutely basic need that people have is for self-respect, that people kill over self-respect and over humiliations. People commit suicide over issues of self-respect. Think about these terrible school shootings that we see, mostly in the United States, but also in some other countries. Those are committed by people who have been deeply shamed, deeply humiliated in most cases. I don't know what the percentage is, but an awful lot of these stories involve a perpetrator who is trying to get back at people. He's trying to retaliate for having been humiliated and shamed over a period of their lives. I think the pyramid, at the very least, it needs another layer really far down in the bottom, at the same level as the physiological needs, maybe even lower. The need for self-respect, it deserves more attention, and it deserves a place in any theory of what human needs are and how they're related to each other. Notice that high up on Maslow's hierarchy is esteem, and he uses well, I don't know if these are Maslow's terms here. This is an article by Elizabeth Hopper that was just updated yesterday, and I recommend it as a source of basic information about this pyramid model. But esteem, for me, probably needs to be in two layers. Yes, there are the kind of self-esteem and status needs and need for recognition and so on that that Maslow was probably thinking of when he put it that high. Those are needs experienced by people who have already got a lot of their more basic needs met. But I think self-respect belongs much lower down in the pyramid, because it is the source of a lot of violence. It is also the thing that nonviolence advocates have to develop plans and programs and interventions to deal with. And you can't take away the violence of a deeply shamed person simply by feeding them and meeting other needs. There's something more basic about that. So there's a suggestion about how we might modify Maslow's theory to bring it perhaps into a more relatable framework for the study of nonviolence and for learning nonviolence. I don't have all the answers here, but I think there is a need for further study in this area. Yeah, we acknowledge that there are these different kinds of needs, but then we need to ask questions about how does this relate to the psychology of violence and nonviolence?